Hello and welcome to the Athletic NBA Show. I'm Dave DeFore, joined by my colleague at The Athletic, our Toronto Raptors beat reporter, Eric Koreen. Eric, I dragged you in here because you wrote, I don't know, is it a column? Is it an opinion piece? I don't know what we would call it, but you kind of nailed this, I think. And you wrote that Damian Lillard is the wrong trade target at the wrong time for the Raptors, and I could not agree more. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I mean, column analysis, opinion, that's sort of just what I try to do. And, you just can't categorize me. You can't keep me in a box,
I can't
Dave.
put you in a box.
Stop trying.
All right, well, let's just kind of catch ourselves up here a little bit, because this week, after months of speculation that the Trailblazers and the Miami Heat were going to work out a deal for Damian Lillard, it's being reported all over the place that the Toronto Raptors are very interested in Damian Lillard and may even be the front runners, if you believe some of the reports that are out there, which I have no reason not to. This doesn't make a lot of sense to me, given where the Raptors are as a team. And I think in order to sort of put some context here, compare this team to the 2019 team that went out and made the Kawhi Leonard trade, because this is what people keep going back to. Masai did this once. He got a guy who didn't want to come here, and look at what happened. They win a championship. Now, this team is just completely different.
Yeah, so let me go over the starting lineup or the sort of rotation for the 2017-18 Raptors, who won 59 games. And that was the year before the Kawhi trade that ended in, yet another embarrassing sweep to LeBron James as the 1 seed this time. You had Jonas Valanciunas, OG Anobi, Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, Serge Ibaka. Off the bench, you had Fred VanVleet, DeLon Wright, Pascal Siakam, Jakob Poeltl, you had Norm Powell, and you had CJ Miles. That's like 11 quality rotation players, and maybe you don't have a superstar there. I mean, not maybe, you don't have a superstar there, but you don't fluke into a 59 win team. And for whatever it's worth, the point differential said they actually should have won 60 games, and given
Not that we splitting hairs around here.
Given that their final game of the year went into overtime and resulted in Fred VanVleet suffering a shoulder injury after taking a screen from Bam Adebayo, which kept him out of most of the first round series against Washington. I'm sure this is where you thought this conversation was going.
Yeah, of course.
They were very close to a 60-win team. I don't think we need to relitigate what made the Kawhi Leonard situation so special, other than but the combination of the peculiarity of that situation.
Well, it was already a very good team, and Kawhi Leonard is a much better player in 2019 than Damian Lillard is in 2023.
How close the Raptors were at the time, and how many times the Raptors had sort of run up against a wall. Even if that wall was moving from Cleveland to Los Angeles, it made a lot of sense to take your big swing and live with the consequences at that point. That doesn't mean there wasn't any risk, but it made sense. This team last year went 41-41. They just lost Fred VanVleet. And fine, you say Damian Lillard replaces him. And obviously, I'm not going to argue that's not an upgrade. It's a huge upgrade. But you're also losing other guys from that team on a team that had just horrific depth. I don't think that had a little bit to do with coaching. I think there was more talent on the roster that then ended up being used, but this was not a deep NBA team. And so that's why you don't do it, on top of he's 33, has eyes for one city, and yeah, you add this guy. Are you an A-level contender in the Eastern Conference? I don't really think so. I think you're behind Milwaukee and Boston, and then in the next group with Cleveland and I'm missing Philadelphia, depending on what happens with them. And maybe you only have 1 or 2 years at this. It's just so much downside risk for what it's going to cost. And we can get into that right now, if you'd like.
Well, and here's the thing. Our opinion on this doesn't matter, right? So this trade could happen. So I want to kind of go through this because, again, they are the supposed front runners to get Damian Lillard. And you laid out some scenarios in this piece where they could go out and get Damian Lillard. And you mentioned Pascal Siakam. But to me, if you're gonna include Pascal Siakam in this trade, why are you making the trade? I mean, Pascal Siakam is at least on the same level, I think, as Damian Lillard as far as a player, especially when you consider how good he is as a defender. So you give him up. I mean, the whole point would be to add Damian Lillard to Pascal Siakam.
Yeah, I included it for completion's sake, but I don't see any viable way that trade makes any sense for the Raptors.
Right. Now, the one trade that has been kind of thrown out there is that maybe OG Anunoby. And again, OG Anunoby is on an expiring deal, just like Pascal Siakam. OG Anobi would be on an expiring deal, so you could see like, okay, this might work for Portland because that's a guy that they could maybe flip and get more assets for. It doesn't make that much sense to me because, once again, if you're the Raptors, I would want to add Lillard to OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam because that's your path to contention. The whole point of getting Damian Lillard would be to try to take one good swing at this, right?
So I'll preface this by saying I think the most likely trade, would it happen, would be one centered on OG Anunoby. And we're going to talk about the other option after this, but I think that's most likely just because we can say his name. Scotty Barnes objectively has more value as somebody who's just going into the 3rd year of his rookie contract. He has, tantalizing upside, even if he hasn't reached it. But I think a trade built around Anunoby, them unlocking the 2024 pick, or I should say unprotecting the 2024 pick they owe to San Antonio, which is currently protected 1 through 6, which would allow them to trade 26, 28, and 30 to Portland if they wanted to do that, plus adding, let's say, Precious Achua, Chris Boucher, and, salary filler, Thaddeus Young, and then having Portland move Anunoby. Presumably they don't want him in addition to Jeremy Grant, and get a younger player or a player who more obviously fits, the obvious name there being DeAndre Ayton. Like, that makes some sense for all parties involved. And you can't extend Anunoby. That's one of the things here, and that's one of the reasons the Raptors have to consider this path. You could probably extend Siakam. He's said he's open to an extension. The most you can offer OG Anunoby right now, based on his contract, is it's sort of like the Jaylen Brown conversation before he made All-NBA. You can only offer him a 4-year, a 4-year, $117 million contract. I think
that's all.
The number. And we saw with the Jeremy Grant contract, like, I like Jeremy Grant. OG Anunoby is a better defensive player than Jeremy Grant. He's probably not quite the offensive player that Jeremy Grant is, but he's also younger and certainly thinks he can. He's heading for at least that contract, if not more, per year, I would say. So you could see why Portland would be hesitant to hold on to him. But also, the Raptors have to think about a world in which Anunoby and Siakam and Gary Trent are all free agents, and that's not a world they want to be in either. So that is the level. That's what a big part of what causes the urgency to go one way or the other. And I think Anunoby is the most likely route there. Saying that, I have questions about how the version of the team that moves Anunoby would look in the short term. And like you said, and by short term, I mean, let's say 2 years, okay?
Right.
So 2 years. How does that team look compared to, say, Siakam and Damian Lillard make total sense together. Jakob Poeltl, like maybe you'd rather somebody with more shooting, but like he's a very good defender at center, makes sense. And then OG Anunoby, he spaces the floor a little bit, doesn't need the ball as much, and just isn't a guy who needs to be a screening partner or have the ball. Like that is like as good of a defensive core to protect Damian Lillard, I think, as you could ask, as you could reasonably ask for. And I think that is the Raptors' best path to winning now in a Lillard trade.
The only issue with that, with OG Anunoby going to Portland, they already have a guy that they need to flip in Jeremy Grant, right? Like that's going to be the next stage of this teardown that they're going to go through is to,
well, they got to wait a few months.
Right, exactly, because they did just sign him in the offseason to this huge contract. So I don't know that they would necessarily be interested in OG Anunoby unless you could rope in a third team, which of course we've heard reports that they would rope in Phoenix to get Ayton to Portland and maybe Nurkic to Phoenix, which if you're Phoenix, I don't know what the thinking is there. Ayton is a pretty good player, and Nurkic is not the defender he used to be. So I don't know what their thought is there. But the deal that makes the most sense to me, if you're Toronto, is one that includes Scotty Barnes. You know, he had a down second year, and I'm not out on Scotty Barnes in any way whatsoever, but I don't think this is a guy who's ready to contribute heavily to a team that would want to be a top 3 seed and make it to a conference finals. I just don't think he's that level of player, and he makes the most sense for Portland because he would be another young guy, and you could see, okay, well, maybe Toronto doesn't have to come up with the draft assets that they might if they were, you know, including OG Anunoby in a trade. I mean, is there a world in which Toronto, I hate to say gives up on, because it wouldn't be giving up, you'd be getting a much better player. But is there a world in which Toronto says, hey, you know what? We're good. We're going to move Scotty Barnes. We're going to take this swing in this short-term window that we've got with Pascal and OG and Damian Lillard. You say maybe 2 years out of the 4 years of his contract that you expect him to be, you know, maybe at this level. Is that something you can see Toronto doing?
So I'm almost like completely aligned with you here, which makes for great podcasting.
Oh yeah. I don't like conflicts. So yeah.
So I'll answer the question directly. I don't think it happens. This front office is always keeping an eye toward the future. And even with the Kawhi trade, like they sent out DeMar, who was DeMar's a great player, but he was the money who had to be included. He was obviously the value or the part to make the deal work. And in terms of future assets, they gave up 1 first-round pick and Jakob Poeltl. Jakob Poeltl at the time, maybe their 3rd or 4th most valuable young player. Certainly you would put him behind Siakam and Van Vliet, probably OG as well at the time. And then a first-round pick, which ended up, I think it became Keldon Johnson. But if you're getting Kawhi Leonard, you're like, okay, we can give up our first-round pick. We're probably going to be pretty good, and this pick will be in the 20s, as it was. They see Scotty Barnes as a bridge to the future. I'm like, after a bad year, I'm not ready, like a disappointing year. His numbers were still fine, but obviously you would have liked some leaps in areas we didn't see them. They still see him as a bridge of sorts to the future. And he's definitely their best young asset. I'm not going to deny that. But if you're asking me, would I rather give up Scotty Barnes and 1 first-round pick or OG Anunoby and 3 first-round picks and another swap? I'd rather do the former. But I'm making up this value right now. Right. But that's I would just feel really hung out there on the edge if I am giving all my pick power to Portland for Damian Lillard, given all the realities of the situation, which I'm sure you've talked about in your last several shows.
Listen, there's nothing happening right now.
We don't need to say all the things that need to be said with Damian Lillard. It's just a lot. And throwing in 3 picks, which Michael Grange reported would be necessary, Michael Grange of Sportsnet, and maybe a pick swap, and who knows, maybe Grady Dick too. That's just like, it's a lot for where this team is.
Meanwhile, Scotty Barnes, if you're Portland, Scotty Barnes kind of gives you another jump start on the rebuild, right? It not only is it not a guy like OG Anunoby that you're going to have to find a home for, right, to get some value out of or pay next summer. He's a guy who might fit nicely with what you have going on already with Scoot and Shadon Sharp is like your, theoretical 1 and 2 of the future. I don't know what Anthony Simons winds up being in this scenario. I'm not as high on Simons as some other people.
Whatever,
because I care about defense.
He's traded or he's a 6th man.
Yeah, he's sure. Something else. And Scotty Barnes could kind of slide in there. Now, one of the problems with Scotty Barnes, and we'll talk a little bit about this upcoming season, is I think Scotty Barnes has not really been given a defined role in Toronto by the coaching staff there the previous 2 seasons. And so I wonder if there isn't a scenario where you're Toronto and you want to say, we need to just see this guy under a different coaching staff, maybe in a different system, which they will this year because they've got a new head coach.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't think they're trading him. So I think they still believe in him a ton. Darko Rajakovic, from when I talked to him out in Vegas, is like super high on him. It's certainly been an odd dynamic over the last, more so last year than 2 years ago in his rookie year. But like, when you had Fred VanVleet, who got used to having the ball in his hands, and you have Pascal Siakam, who's just like, his strengths are very similar, let's say, to Barnes, in that they both excel as bigger forwards with the ball in their hands, or that's what we think Scotty Barnes wants to do pretty much. It just becomes an odd fit. And like, to take it back to Lillard, this is what I was hinting at earlier when we were talking about Anunoby. If it's Barnes who stays instead of Anunoby, you can't include all these guys in basic pick and roll actions. And if you're not having Lillard running a lot of pick and roll, all of a sudden either Scotty Barnes is standing in the corner or Pascal Siakam is standing in the corner. And I just, not that it's unworkable, because they're both very talented players in different, if not entirely different ways, but it would be an experiment of spacing and fit. And this is a team that doesn't have a lot of shooting. So once you're removing one of Anunoby or Gary Trent, like, it becomes even more complicated, even if Lillard adds a ton of it on his own. It's just an odd fit to me, the trio, especially when you add in Jakob Poeltl, of Lillard, Siakam, and Barnes. And more so, and this is what I've been trying to figure out for the last year before Lillard even became a part of this conversation, Siakam and Barnes. And I think that's where, I don't mean it's like interpersonal, but that's where some of like the stylistic tension and just lack of fit comes from on this roster, is that they are at heart, very solidly similar players.
Pretty similar, yeah. I mean,
they can do a lot. They can
do so much better, right?
Yeah, right now. But they can both do a lot. But what they can't do, reliably making 3-pointers, and what they're good at, being involved like with the ball in some way, sort of limits their utility when they're not in that situation. It's complex, and I mean, the Raptors' half-court offense has not been good the last few years, and I don't think, that's a coincidence. It's a hard puzzle to make work.
I mean, this season coming up, it's kind of a crossroads season for Toronto. They've got,
so was the trade deadline last year, and so was this offseason. I answered somebody on
I can't
Twitter
believe they didn't
today.
Move these guys. I can't believe they didn't move these guys last year at the deadline, man. I mean, I am just shocked to push it off to now. I mean, again, they lose Fred VanVleet. during the summer. They're going to have a decision to make on OG Anobi and on Pascal Siakam, no matter what. I mean, is there a scenario in which they don't make this Damian Lillard trade, and then they wind up moving both OG and Pascal Siakam this year before the trade deadline, and we just witness another? I mean, it would be the first real teardown since Masai got there.
Yeah, what's funny is he came to Toronto and everybody was like waiting for the tear.
He's going to tear it down. I remember all the stories were like, finally, Masai's going to get a chance to tear something down. And then he makes the big trade and they get Kawhi and they win a title.
Well, I mean, just take it back to 2013-14. We were a James Dolan veto basically away from Kyle Lowry going to the Knicks. And who knows what happens to DeMar at that point, and we might have seen like a real teardown. And I think with a title under the Raptors' belt, the fans will take the results. But it's just funny looking back on Masai Ujiri's tenure, and like everybody thought this was going to be like the first media day, the 2013 media day. I remember there was a question specifically about taking, and I don't even remember which player it was giving the interviewer the side eye, saying, because we know players don't tank, it's organizations that tank. I've forgotten your actual question now, but there's
could we see this be a teardown?
There's a chance. I would be surprised if both of them were traded. It wouldn't shock me, but like I think the most sensible thing is that one of them is traded and one of them is extended, because I don't think there's a ton of appetite for like, and they've seen what has been out there for both players. That is the benefit of the deadline and the offseason. It's not like they've lacked for offers on these players. It's not like they don't know what the current market value is. Now, the market value will always be changing, but they approximately know what they can get, which is why, in all honesty, a trade hasn't happened. Obviously, they haven't been overwhelmed by such an offer, but I think they're almost, if this trade or a similar trade, and I don't know who that would be, doesn't manifest, barring this fitting way better under a new coach than it did under the old coach, Nick Nurse, who, like, whatever you think of him, is a pretty smart guy when it comes to basketball. I think one of them would be very likely to go. Saying that, I am just making no proclamations about them definitely trading anybody, because I was with you at the deadline. I don't know how many trade columns I wrote. I don't know about the off-season columns about potential trades. We've all heard the rumors about Siakam to Atlanta. This front office is patient. I've argued, some others have argued, sometimes patient to a fault, but to their credit, if you think it's worth the credit, they've been patient to put themselves in a position to get in the Damian Lillard conversation. And if that's something they see as worthwhile, well, that patience will have paid off for their ultimate view. We could disagree.
But this is ultimately about being in the Giannis Antetokounmpo conversation and the Joel Embiid conversation, correct?
I don't know if it's ultimately about that, but it is. I don't think they think they're not in that conversation with Lillard, but they probably think it would help. But again, it depends on what you're moving out, because, if you're moving out that package, again, the OG package, let's call it, what are you trading to make that work financially? Like it just becomes hard to make it work and all fit on the same timeline. I'm not saying it can't.
Sure.
Like obviously you could extend and trade Scotty when he becomes eligible. You can sign Pascal and then trade him, and that's a big part of it. But it becomes like it's very difficult to make it part of the same timeline, I would say. That'd be a dream. But I don't think that's what the Lillard trade is all about. It's partly about it, but not all about it.
Yeah, but we'll be doing this next summer, talking about Giannis, because it's just the way that the way that the world works.
Remember basketball, Dave?
Hey, listen.
I
Hey,
know, I know how much of an old man I sound, like, and I don't like it. And like, I do like thinking about front office
sure.
machinations. I like, it's interesting. I get why people are interested. I'm interested. It's just not all that I'm interested in, and that's like, that's where it becomes exhausting to me. But none of these front offices owe it to me to not exhaust me mentally.
That's
They
right.
have
It's a
they have
82
different
game league. 82 game league, according to Adam
12 months
Silver. 12 months
12 months a year, baby.
coverage.
Let's go.
All right. Go and check out Eric's work over at The Athletic. He covers the Raptors better than anybody. And again, this column is worth reading because he does kind of lay out exactly the process that would be involved and why it's not exactly the best move. Eric Koreen, thank you very much for joining me here on the Athletic NBA Show. We'll be back later on this week with more Athletic NBA Show.